Hello everyone, my name is Josh Barron, certified instructor here at Midwest Truck Driving School. So today we're going to cover how to do a pre-trip inspection on the back part of a semi-truck, including the coupling systems, the brakes, the tires, the suspension components, the drive shaft, all that good stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, first, when you're doing a vehicle inspection, especially on your test, it's always good to have a stick. That way you're able to point to all the different things that you need to point to. So in here, we're going to go ahead and check our fuel tank here. First of all, we're going to make sure that the cap here is present and tight. We're going to check the straps to make sure it's securely mounted and make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken. And look underneath for puddles, which would signify potential leaks in the system. Then we're going to check our air and electrical lines right here. So our air lines, we want to make sure they're secured at both ends and they're not cut, frayed, or weather checked or leaking. And like I said, this securement, we're going to look at the glad hand seals here and to make sure they're not cut, frayed, or weather checked. And then here's our electrical pigtail. We're going to make sure that is going to be secure at both ends and no bare wire showing on our electrical line. As we come in here, we're going to check our drive shaft right here. And we got numerous drive shafts here that we're going to check. Drive shaft here, drive shaft here, drive shaft back here. We're going to check our drive shafts to make sure they are securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, and no slop in the universal joints. Then here, we're going to check our frame as well as our cross members here. Our frame and our cross members going across. We're going to make sure these are not cracked, bent, or broken, and no welds other than factory. As we get in here, now we can go and check our fifth wheel components here. So of course, we're looking at the fifth wheel skid plate right here. We're going to make sure it is not cracked, bent, or broken, no welds on the factory, and freshly greased. So you can see here, you see a couple rust spots here. We definitely got to put a little bit more grease on there, which we'll do here in a minute. Next, we'll check the release handle. Now, this is if this was connected to the trailer, we'd want to make sure that it was latched properly and in the engaged lock position. Right now it's in the open position, and then we're going to check that safety latch to make sure it's over the locking lever. The safety latch with this one is inside of the fifth wheel. It's part of the internal components there. Next, we're going to check our fifth wheel pins here. Check our pins to make sure they are in the locked position and that they allow for enough clearance when connected between the back of the tractor, the landing gear, and the landing gear, back of the tractor and the landing gear here. Next, we'll check our bolts, bolt, all the way through. Check our bolts to make sure everything is securely mounted and the mounting bolts are present and tight. And then from there, we'll check our platform, this piece right here. I want to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, and no welds other than factory. From here, we're going to check our locking jaws. So we can see our locking jaws right here. So we're going to check our locking jaws, and then if it was latched to the trailer, we're going to make sure it is locked in position, locked around the shank of the kingpin. So obviously it's unlocked right now, but we can take a good look at the jaws. Next, let's go ahead and move on to our tires. So we're going to check our tires. Now, an acronym I like to use is ICD. I stands for inflation. We can do so with a tire gauge. We want a minimum 2/32 of an inch. C stands for condition. Make sure they're not cut, frayed, weather checked, leaking, or bulging. And then we want to check the I for inflation, condition, and depth. And with the inflation here, we can do so with a tire gauge there. Also, because these are duals, we're going to check the bud spacing here to make sure it isn't cracked, bent, or broken. It's keeping the tires evenly spaced with nothing lodged in between the duals. Then this brings us to our lug nuts here. We're going to check our lug nuts as well as our axle nuts. Make sure all the nuts are present and that they're tight. If they were loose, you could tell by rust streaks or shiny metal. From here, we'll check our axle seal and I'll make sure it's securely mounted on both the front and the back side of the tire and that fluid level is full. Then we'll check our rim right here to make sure it is not cracked, bent, or broken and no welds other than factory. From here, we can get into our suspension components. On the front over here, we have our front leaf spring mount. We want to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, no welds other than factory. And then we have our leaf springs right here. We're going to make sure they are securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, no missing leaves. And then here we have our U-bolts. I'm going to check our U-bolts to make sure our U-bolts are present and the nuts are tight. If they were loose, you could tell by shiny metal on the bottom side of the U-bolts there. Next, we'll check our shock. So you see our shock right here. We're going to check the top and the bottom mount, make sure it's securely mounted. make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken and not leaking. And on the back side over here, we have an airbag. So we'll check the airbag to make sure it's securely mounted at both the top and the bottom mount. And then we're going to check the bag. It's made of rubber, so make sure it's not cut, frayed, or weather checked or leaking. Next, the other suspension component that a lot of people miss is going to be the torque arm. So you see that right here. We're going to check the torque arm to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken. You can see that right there. Next, we're going to move on to our brakes. So you see our brakes right here. We're going to check the brake chamber to make sure it's securely mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, and the band is secure and not leaking. Then we're going to check our hoses and our lines. Our hoses to make sure they are not cut, frayed, or weather check or leaking, and then our lines to make sure they're secure at both ends with no bare wire showing. That's, of course, our ABS line. Then we're going to check our slack adjuster and push rod. Now, it's hard to see here. Let me see if I can get a better view of it here. You can kind of see it right there a little bit. Kind of hard to see right there, but you can see it right there. The slack adjuster and push rod right here. So we're going to make sure it's resting at approximately 90-degree angle, that the pins are in. The push rod isn't cracked or bent and has no more than 1 inch of play. Then we're going to go ahead and check our drum and our lining. So you can see our drum and our lining right here. We're going to check our drum to make sure it isn't cracked, bent, or broken and no fluid on the drum. And then check our lining to make sure there's a minimum 1/4 inch of pad and that it's not worn dangerously thin. And we can see it looks pretty good. Now this truck is obviously a little rusty, but overall not in bad shape. As we get to the back of the tractor here, we're going to check our mud flap here as well to make sure it's securely mounted, no cuts or gouges are out of the mud flap. So that right there, guys, is more or less how you do a proper DOT FMCSA pre-trip inspection on the back of a semi-truck. Do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button for more great content from Midwest Truck Driving School. And if you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call, 906-789-6311. Thanks and have a great day. Take care.